Meteorologist Mike Seidel is in Morgan City, Louisiana. And Mike, here we go again for Louisiana. This is not great news, but by now they certainly know the drill, I would think.
They certainly do after Laura. Laura went west of here, so they had minimal impact here. They had a 3-foot surge, not a whole lot of power out. It was all over in the southwest part of the state, the western part of Louisiana, as we know how bad Lake Charles and down towards Cameron and those beaches got hit. We're out here on the Atchafalaya River. We're looking down river towards, well, where it ends up, the Gulf of Mexico. They're doing their dredging. This is very typical to keep the river channel open and deep. A lot of sediment and sand comes upriver through the Atchafalaya Basin over time. So this is not because, particularly just because we have another hurricane coming in. This goes on constantly. Let's spin around here, and we've got this boardwalk here. There's kind of a big dock, and this is the Morgan City seawall. Now, they increased it by a factor of 2. Back in 1985, they got it built up to 22 feet. They had some horrible flooding in the early 70s. It was only about 12 feet. So you get a sense as I walk over here how big this wall is. And then down there is one of the seawall gates they closed this morning. Let me show you what it looked like. It's kind of old-fashioned. They get a piece of heavy equipment and a chain, and they just pull on it and pull on it. You can see there how it just closes right up. Now, there are other entrances for us to get out, and they're not going to close those today, but they're just trying to get some of them closed to get a little head start on what's going to come in here, and that's going to start tomorrow night. And certainly Friday is the day here. We're under hurricane watch. That will more than likely, almost guaranteed, that will be changed to a hurricane warning, if not late tonight, tomorrow morning from the National Hurricane Center. Nice sunny day today, upper 80s. Now, the real threat with the wind and rain again is going to be late tomorrow night, and the timing's not etched in stone on the landfall, and certainly Friday and Friday evening. If you've got weekend plans, no problem Sunday. Saturday morning, there may be a few leftover showers here, depending on how fast it moves through the state of Louisiana. So, Jackie, yes, another tropical system in Louisiana. New Orleans, once again, at this point, is going to miss the worst of this. Remember, we were concerned about Laura. That stayed too far to the west. Houston was more threatened for a couple of days. And then we had Sally, which ended up farther east. So they have really been fortunate. Right now, New Orleans, the city, and the lake is under a tropical storm watch.
All right, so let's talk more about that. New Orleans, by the way, it is one of the places that we have to watch. Mike Seidel is in Morgan City right now. And, Mike, I know they've got the walls that they put up here already today.
Yes, they're in pretty good shape as far as surge around the city because they have this big seawall. And a gentleman who is kind of in charge of the whole operation, Tim Mott with the St. Mary Levee District. Tim, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
And let's talk a little bit about the wall behind you. I know it was reconstructed in '85 after the '73 floods.
Right.
But a lot of times where we're standing is underwater. It's not because of tropical weather.
Right. River flooding every year. We're a distributary of the Mississippi. Every time you hear the Mississippi's in flood, the Atchafalaya is in flood. And so we experience that regularly. As a result of that, we have to close these gates fairly often, and particularly over the last few years, we've had to close them quite often. So they're exercised, they're ready to go, and they can work.
And let's talk a little bit about what your concern is. Once you get the gates closed, we're more than likely going to be okay based on the latest forecast. What about the areas around the lakes?
Well, that's always a concern because there is a backwater effect to that high water. But based on the current predictions, the backwater levees in protecting Morgan City should be of sufficient elevation to protect us from flooding on that side also.
And you mentioned you have some projects underway. You want to get those folks protected at least in the short term before the hurricane hits.
That's correct. It's actually a very busy time for the Levee District. We have over $70 million worth of projects under construction right now. The problem is they're not ready. And you know, so in that particular case, we have one that we're temporarily closing. We just didn't have enough time to get it finished, so we're temporarily closing one. There's another one, we're building a small levee berm across an area to keep an area from inundating. And lastly, there's an area that we have a project under design on that for the last 3 storms we've had to close temporarily. We're implementing that one right now also, ensuring it up, getting it up a little higher.
And we talked about the record river level, and it didn't occur during a hurricane. And the fact that we're going into Delta with a river level of just about 2 feet, we're at a low river level, that's a real big help going into this.
It is. Hurricane Barry just last year this river was already at 7, meaning we would be standing this deep in water right now and then put a storm surge on top of that.
Right.
Now we've got easily 3 feet before it gets to the top of the bank. So we've got a little more capacity to handle that, so that puts us a little bit at ease. Unfortunately, for the people that are on the unprotected side of the river here, they're just going to get subject to flooding.
And we have some already voluntary evacuations. Right. Okay, Tim Mott, thank you from the Levee district here, St. Mary. We're in St. Mary Parish. Jackie, good background on what they're expecting and what they're prepared for. But again, the fact that the river is so low going into Delta and the projected surge, that is a big, big positive.
Huge help for sure. Thanks so much, Mike. You know, another city along a river, that's where we find our Mike Seidel. And Mike, you know, we heard from the mayor earlier that they're in pretty good shape when it comes to storm surge, but there are still other threats, and I'm sure people there are very storm weary this year.
Well, they are when you're in that many cones, and they've had a close call with Laura, but it was far enough west. We're thinking the track of Hurricane Delta will be a bit farther east. That puts them, certainly they're going to be on what we call the dirty side of the storm. We're going to have the wind, the surge issue, and the rainfall. But the rainfall, it's not going to be prolific like Sally because the storm's going to be moving at a really nice clip. Sally, remember, landfalled at about 2 or 3 miles an hour forward speed. This is the Atchafalaya River. We're fortunate it's down at about 2 feet. Now, with Barry last summer, it was up around 6 or 7. Remember, when the Mississippi gets full, the water ends up here in the Atchafalaya Basin and backs up. And this is the giant door, one of those gates here at the seawall that goes up to 22 feet. They finished this in 1985. It was only at about 12 feet. And they've only been up to about 10.5 to 11 feet so far, Barry last year. But again, with Barry, the water was already higher on the river. You can see the where the water was in the spring. So they had these gates closed for a couple months back in the spring. So they're pretty confident, talking to the mayor and the other folks, they're not going to really be overly concerned about any surge. Even if they get up to 7, 8, 9 feet. But they are concerned, Jackie and Carl, about the wind and the forecast wind gust and the power. The power structure here is not the best, as the mayor said, so they're just really worried about losing power here, more so, and some structural damage, more so than river water getting into the city. Not with a wall like that, my gosh. This is no way that's going to happen.
Yeah, good to see that they are protected there. Mike, thank you so much. And we continue to follow the hurricane hunters, and in this latest pass,
city officials began closing the seawalls today in Morgan City, Louisiana. That's where we find our own Mike Seidel.
This is the Atchafalaya River here in Morgan City, Louisiana, and it is going to come up for sure with that surge forecast. Delta making its approach and landfalling likely south and west of here sometime later Friday. The water comes up. Now, they are dredging the river. They do this all the time to keep the harbor nice and deep for navigation and for shipping. But I want to show you the saving grace here in Morgan City. Look at this monster seawall. They doubled the height of this back in the 1980s. This was completed in 1985 at 22 feet. And look at this giant door, this gate. This morning we're here. Look at this. This is how they close it. It's pretty simple. They just attach a chain to a piece of heavy equipment and they just pull it closed. They've got about 40 of these to close up ahead of Hurricane Delta. But we talked to city officials and they're not overly concerned because of where the water level sits right now on the Atchafalaya River.
Hurricane Barry just last year, this river was already at 7, meaning we would be standing this deep in water right now and then put a storm surge on top of that. Now we've got easily 3 feet before it gets to the top of the bank. So we've got a little more capacity to handle that, so that puts us a little bit at ease. Unfortunately, for the people that are on the unprotected side of the river here, they're just going to get subject to flooding.
And thankfully, the river is down. Their biggest concern here, we talked to the mayor and other city officials, the wind. Worried about structural damage and by and far power outages. Remember, with Laura, the storm was far enough west, they didn't get nearly as much wind. So this time around, they could get wind gusts in excess of hurricane force, and that could knock out quite a bit of power. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel, the Weather Channel, Morgan City, Louisiana.